Good day to everyone. This is Saurabh from Pune, India, and we have with us Aditi from Sweden, Stockholm. So we are moving on to the second episode of the clinical research talk series. So in this particular episode, we are going to talk about regulatory aspects of clinical trial. So when I say regulatory aspect, it means all the rules and regulation that govern the conduct of clinical trial. In this particular session, we are going to talk about the regulatory aspects of United States, the European Union, the Indian regulatory market, as well as the African regulation that govern clinical trial. By talking about these particular regulation, we will get a comprehensive idea that which are the rules that govern clinical trial and what are the different aspects of it. So before starting the session, I would also like to inform you that this is a collaboration between three YouTube channels. So the first one is the Alpha to Omega, which is run by Aditi. So it talks about a lot of statistical analysis, machine learning, and use of various statistical analysis methods to process data in particular manner, which she will add expertise to these sessions. The other YouTube channels are Clinical Aim Research and Clinical Research X360. So these channels also provide you with various clinical research topics and understanding. So let's start today's session.
Yeah. So hi. So I'm just going to give a overview about the different kind of regulations and why these regulations are there. And of course, we have regulations within clinical research to ensure standardization, quality, and safety, primarily to the study participants, and also to ensure the integrity and accuracy of the data and make it scientifically sound. So the main regulatory agencies that govern clinical trials are the Food and Drug Administration, Pharmaceutical and Medical Devices Agency, European Medicine Agency, and Central Drugs Standard Control Organization that govern clinical trials on a national and as well as international level. So these the general principles governing clinical trials are based on the International Council of Harmonization, Good Clinical Practices, which is short, which can also be called ICH-GCP for short. Yeah. Um,
So let's moving on from that.
Yeah. So here I think any clinical research talk is always incomplete behind without mentioning the historical milestones and the historical perspective. Though I'm not going to cover this in detail, but I just want to mention that the Nuremberg trials, which were conducted during the Holocaust, as well as the incorrect Tuskegee syphilis study in 1932, were the two trials that really brought upon the need to have ethical principles for clinical trials. And of the Nuremberg trials were the primary starting point to why the ICH-GCP came into place. Though the GCP was formed in 1964, and this formulation of the JCP, since it's a global rule, they ensure the safety, efficacy, and the higher quality of the clinical trial on a worldwide perspective. Yeah. So of course, these are the golden rules of GCP, which govern the clinical trials of the entire world. So it puts a lot of stress on the ethical standards of the clinical trials, as well as the fact that the benefits of the clinical trial should outweigh the risk, and the safety should be of primary importance, and enough information should be available, as well as the fact that the trial has to be scientifically sound as possible, and the quality should be assured. So these are the 13 principles which are readily available on a global standard. Yeah, so this is a bit about the global market insight, and as you can see, this is the global pharmaceutical market, with Northern America taking the largest share, followed by Asia Pacific, as well as the European market and Latin America. And Middle East and Africa, though they have only 3% of the market share, but they have quite a large population, as well as a lot of infectious disease are prominent in Africa. Um, and here, the world leader of clinical trials are United States of America, with 51% of clinical trials which are conducted in USA. And Japan is swiftly gaining leverage, which can be included in the Asia Pacific market. And one of the reasons, unfortunately, is that the fact that they have a growing number of elderly population, which makes it a place for conducting clinical trials in diseases related to aging and senescence. Yeah.
So now, moving on to the regulations that come out of the United States. So first and foremost, let me tell you that United States was the first country to introduce any kind of regulations or laws to the pharmaceutical products. And through those efforts, the Food and Drug Administration was born, and it is the primary agency which approves the clinical trial and monitors the public health in United States. And these regulations or the clinical trials in USA are considered to be very stringent, and therefore a lot of medications takes a lot of time. And essentially, US is the leader in rules and regulation of the clinical trial around the world, and it has also contributed significantly into the rules and regulations which were later adopted by various countries also. And I would like also to talk about the submission process for the new drug applications, as well as the investigational new drug application is quite stringent, because there is a certain focus on the public health safety. Okay, so when it comes to clinical trial, there is a conception, or rather a misconception, that it is focused only on the use of medication on the human subject. But you have to understand that safety is the utmost priority in clinical trials. And the Office of Generic Drugs, even when the patent expires, there are generic drug trials. So even that, they apply very stringent rules and regulation, due to which it makes very difficult to get approval from the US markets. That is the thing. Also, the standards for safety and efficacy drug are kept very high by the US regulations, and that is the reason why FDA is known for their heavy focusing on clinical trial monitoring systems, and essentially it helps paving way towards more safety of the clinical trials, rather than just focusing on the efficacies. So this was in general the rules and regulations of the United States. Now coming on to Indian regulation for the clinical trial. So the foundation of the Indian regulation of the clinical trial lies in Drugs and Cosmetic Act 1940s, followed by Drugs and Cosmetic Rules of 1945. And recently, the Indian regulations underwent amendment, and these were very progressive changes in terms of new drugs and clinical trial rules, which are famously known as NDCT rules 2019. So in that rule, one of the most critical aspect was the Clinical Trial Registry of India, which is an effort by Indian Council of Medical Research. So you cannot conduct any clinical trial in India until and unless you have registered in a central directory. So there was no registry per se till this time, and now it is being made mandatory by the Indian Regulatory Authority DCGI. So that is a very good effort. Along with India is also a signatory of ICH-GCP, so we also have a focus on the quality assurance and safety aspects, the ethical aspects in terms of the ethical concerns. Also, when it comes to Indian regulatory market, the new amendment brought Sugam portal. So Sugam portal is generally used for submission of SAE. So earlier it used to happen that the documents were physically printed and signed and then shared to the central agency in New Delhi, and then it was to and fro from that. But the government has also digitized and kept it on a single portal, so which takes precedent from the clinical trial safety reporting methods, and it has made monitoring clinical trials way more safer and way more efficient. And finally, it can be said that there is a revolution in Indian clinical trial industry, and it is moving in a right direction. in terms of the automatic approval, which means that even in 30 days you don't get any response from the Indian regulatory agency, it is considered to be approval. So these kind of automatic approval even essentially highlights the binding of the government to follow certain timelines. So that is a very positive for the industry, as well as the speedy review and response of the approvals. So this is a very good thing for the industry. And the Indian government has also focused on streamlining digitization and globalization of the Indian regulatory itself. So the regulatory agency in India along is rapidly digitizing and also considering the safety aspects of the clinical trial. So essentially, we can say that the Indian regulatory is not only at par at the global regulatory, but also following footstep, and in some aspects such as Sugam Portal and CTRI, even leading to the United States. So when it comes to population paradigm, so there is India, China, and the other populations. But when it comes to regulation, it has always been that the West would lead and the rest of the world would follow. But the Asia Pacific market is also taking the lead and understanding the importance of the clinical trial. And India, being the pharmacy of the world, has highlighted the same and has even highlighted by taking concrete steps in terms of the regulation in the NDCP 2019. So the Indian regulation has become more stronger. So now we'll see the European regulations, and I'll hand it over to Aditi.
Yeah. So one thing about the European regulations is that first of all, the approval of an IND and NDA is always regulated by the European Medicine Agency, in which governs the regulations of the entire European Union. Even though individual member states have their own medical agency, but they still have to go in accordance to the European Medicine Agency, and as short for, also called EMA for short. Now, one of the things and changes that the EMA has brought upon is that they have made a central portal, which is the EU clinical trial registry. And one of the main goals behind this is to ensure the harmonization and standardization of clinical trials across the European Union. And now the EMA has made it mandatory to publish all the clinical trial studies and the data, despite, even if it has failed, even if the trial is not successful, even if it has no outcomes, but it still has to be published in order to ensure transparency. And now the EMA is focusing on further harmonization across the EU. And it is also focused on safety reporting. So there are multiple agencies which are responsible for safety reporting, and they want to go in accordance to the World Health Organization. And for the EMA, safety reporting and post-marketing surveillance has become as important as the clinical trial. And as mentioned before, there the one rule that EMA has followed, that there has to be transparency and standardization across all the member states of the European Union and the European Economic Area. Yeah. And I think right now I would like to introduce a little bit about African clinical trial harmonization, because I feel that a lot of the time this continent has been neglected a lot. And even though a lot of infectious disease research comes from Africa, or comes from the African continent, so now the Pan-African Clinical Trials Registry has is an initiative which harmonizes all the clinical trials within Africa. So here it is a registry which makes information regarding studies, trial design, and other aspects accessible to the African continent. Now, this wants to be a comprehensive database of all the planned, ongoing, or completed trials within the whole continent. And this is a very good initiative to harmonize the entire continent and all the clinical studies. And there's also an initiative of the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum, which is the which is the national regulation authority and ethics community for the entire continent. So, as well as mentioned, Africa is a hotbed of research for infectious disease, but there is a hope for a future that it will be the hotbed of clinical research in general. But the current drawback is that oftentimes in the African member states, in the African continent, they still don't have the level of infrastructure that is often needed to conduct sophisticated clinical trials. But as time progresses, I there is a hope to see this improve. So
Sure.
this is
And
sort of, and you want to talk about this?
yeah. So just I was saying that till now we have seen the laws and the regulation governing the clinical trials in US, India, Europe, and also Africa. And the thing is, you might have thought that wouldn't it be easier to have a single rules and regulation which can be applied all over the world. So the thing is, there is such a convention in terms of ICH-GCP, which harmonizes biggest market, and these are the highlights of it. So the thing is, the intention behind that is to bring expertise from both the regulatory authorities and India and in the sorry industry, which means that there are various markets and there are various pharmaceutical company in those particular market. So bringing both together on a single platform and deciding to harmonize the thing in order to reduce the cost of medication, reduce the efforts, because a lot of time it used to happen that a particular drug is getting approval in the United States, and the same drug has to come to India and again conduct clinical trial and get the approval. But what if we have a single or central guideline which can make the entire conduct of the clinical trial acceptable to the other regions as well? So that was the initiative by ICH, and even today, although I can say a lot of countries, including India, have ratified the ICGCP convention, but when it comes to following the same, we can see there are discrepancy across the world. So if we do that and streamline that, it can be a very good help not only to clinical research industry, but the entire pharmaceutical industry by reducing the cost of the medication. Second thing is the guidelines which are designed are obviously science based, and there should be consensus driven, because we know that US leads the guidelines and the regulations. But when it comes to African continent, as we have seen that we have regulatory agency or the registry for a one particular country, for example, the CTRI in India. But when it comes to Africa, there is not that much of funding. Plus, the clinical trial scenario there is just starting up. So the same kind of guidelines application to African without consistency, that can be a problem. So that has to be taken care of. The third thing would be the following of a clear and effective management process. So although we all follow the GCP conventions, but when it comes to management, there are different challenges in different countries. The challenges in US might not be the same as in Africa or India. So that is the thing. Also, when it comes to close collaboration between the parties with comparable regulatory and technical capability, so that can be harmonized. For example, the initial signatories of ICGCP, the Europe, FDA, US, and Japan, they can really harmonize that particular regulation. But when it comes to other countries such as even India and China, which almost is one third of the entire global population. So what if the regulatory agencies of this particular country could sit together on a single table and make ICGCP that particular platform on which there can be a consensus between all the countries. There can be difference of opinion, but when it comes to pharmaceutical medicines vaccine, so it does not differentiate between different countries and ethnicities. It is a global aspect to safety. So that can be close collaboration can be focused on. Next thing is the regulators are committed to implement the ICH's guidelines, but that commitment has to be also seen in practicality when it comes to implementing that guidelines and acceptance in other regulatory markets, because there is a lot of skepticism of a particular drug approved in Indian market and directly going to US market. So if there is a method, or if there are regulators which are committed of implementing the same guidelines all over the world, then we can reduce that particular regulatory agency's efforts. And finally, these global platforms also brings critical tools to conduct clinical trial, because I can clearly see that when it comes to United States, they are more moving forward in terms of digitization of the clinical trial, in terms of having sophisticated software to manage clinical trial data. And I can also see in India there are still clinical trial which are using paper based clinic case report forms. So in an era where our data is quickly entered into digital format, and where it is quickly processed and stored in the world of 5Gs. So can't there be a global effort, a common global platform, where we can design a piece of software or a portal which could essentially be available to the underprivileged countries or the underprivileged markets? So if such kind of global efforts and platforms are used and the tools are used, it could really help in harmonizing the ethos due to which ICGCP started. And ICH also remains current by revising the process and governance. But when it comes to having implementation and ratification of those particular conventions, then it is a cause of concern, because these are just advisory laws but not mandatory. So everyone can be signatory to particular convention, but when it comes to ratification and application, applying them strictly, then I think it should be a collective effort. What do you think about this, Aditi?
Yeah,
About
and I
harmonizing?
wanted,
Yeah,
I mean, we focused a lot on harmonization, and
yeah,
we
yeah, yeah.
focused a lot on, we had given a lot of focus on the FDA and India, and we then after that we spoke about harmonizing in terms of the European Union and African continent. But I also had, I mean, I was wondering, why is India, India's governed by CDSCO, and then Japan has its own ICH-GCP. So why, as Asia Pacific, are we not focusing on harmonization like the EU and Africa are?
See, as per my understanding and experience in clinical trial is, the thing is, US is currently the leader in convention and rules, and the Europe as well as the Japanese regulatory authorities, they are the initial members who thought of harmonizing everything. But when it comes to Indian market or even Asian market, there is China. So there are difference of opinion and there is different challenges of applying the same system or the same tools and the same guidelines. Because the thing is, I observe some practical dissimilarities, because when it comes to using certain tools, for example, there is a friend of mine who works in clinical trials in US. He is not using paper ICS. He's directly given a iPad, and these CRCs enter the data directly, and that data is immediately uploaded to the cloud, and they can directly process that data. So that is the level of technology they are using. But to use the same technology in India, where you also have to have reliability of the internet connections, plus infrastructure issues are there, plus when it comes to softwares, so the cost of using even the Oracle by any
Hmm.
small sponsor, they still have to pay that much fees. So US can say that we are moving towards a digitization, but when it comes to on ground reality, so I'm talking about Indian challenges. Now think about the African challenges,
Yeah.
where there cannot be digitization directly from the word go. There are still in a process of harmonizing the guidelines, let alone the processing of data. That is the thing. Plus, the most critical aspect, according to me, is the trust on the data, because everyone has their own opinion on the data. As we know that
Yeah.
even the Chinese
Yeah.
have their concern on sharing of the data and accepting the regulations of the other countries. So I think Asia is lacking, because if you see the Indians and the Chinese, these are very two big people. China is expertise, they are having expertise, and the world relies them in terms of the API. And when it comes to production of the vaccine and other affordable medication, they rely on India.
Yeah.
So the reliability of India and Chinese market over the world is tremendous. Even that we saw in COVID-19 also. The India used to produce vaccine, and then the rest of the world used to get that. So India and China should not only be the production factories, but they should also get a seat on the table to discuss their concern. And then based on a collective consensus, we can come up with the guidelines. Because you can see ICGCP has very sophisticated members in terms of US, Japan, and Europe. But as we say that we are a third world countries, it is not a third world, but the thing is we have third world challenges.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
And
true. Yeah.
exactly. So to counter those challenges, the Europeans have to accept that these are legitimate challenges, and we are going to find a way out of it. Because as far as India is concerned, I can say that we are no longer asking anyone for validation. We are asking seat on the table. May that be in UN Security Council or any other platform. Because the thing is, we can produce quality medication and export to all around the world. But when it comes to guidelines, so we would also like the United States, the Europe, and Japan to consult us, or to have India, China, and other Asia, even Africa on the table. Because if we don't do that, then we cannot say that we are using a global guidelines. So I think that these are some of the critical aspect due to which we cannot harmonize the guidelines. Although we all countries will sign the ICH-GCP convention, but until and unless we collectively sit on a single table and discuss all the grievances,
Mhm.
so that
Okay.
is a challenge.
Okay. I mean, so okay. So we've had a lot of interesting aspects and a lot of opinions on something that's supposed to be very straightforward, because regulatory affairs that way is quite straightforward. But the more you go into it, we realize it's not so straightforward as as we
Exactly.
thought. And the next video we are planning is something also very interesting, very so we are thinking, we are in the talks for a video on clinical data management in terms of uh, how it is managed, processed, what are the important statistical tools for this, and as well as the role of machine learning in clinical data analysis. And
Exactly.
yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry to cut you, Aditi, but I just want to tell all the viewers and people who are listening that we are going to talk about not only how the data is generated, but how the data is processed. Because in clinical trial, there are thousands and thousands of subjects, and each subject generates a tremendous amount of data. So Aditi is currently working in machine learning, so in statistical analysis. So she is going to essentially show us what are the cutting edge technologies which can be used to process the data,
Yeah.
and that is essentially falls under the purview of clinical data management, as I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aditi.
Yeah, I mean, in the world of machine learning, in the world of data processing, the more data you have, the better it is. So data is equal to gold. But then we will go more in detail when we have our session, which should be next week. And we've been really looking forward to this session, and we're gathering a lot of information so that we can present our viewers with that. So I'd like to conclude with that, and I'm really excited for the next session personally. What about you, Saurabh? Are you really
No,
looking
I'm
forward to
I'm
that?
very much excited, because I, being a clinical research professional, want to know what happens to the data, how is that data processed, what are the cutting edge technology. Because I get fascinated when you talk about machine learning, artificial intelligence, statistical analysis, but until and unless I see and a
Yeah.
person like you who is working into it, I'm really excited for the next session.
Yes.
So
So I think that's a good conclusion, and we hope we can generate the same excitement amongst our viewers. Yeah.
sure. So we'll see you next week, and thank you for watching and listening to this particular session. So stay tuned. We are going to come up with very exciting content, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and thank you for listening and watching.